Well, good morning. Despite what it may seem, it is so good to be here with you all this morning. So good to be in worship together as we inch closer and closer to Christmas. If you're new here, if you don't know who I am, my name is Zach. I have the privilege of pastoring this church, and I want to say on behalf of all of us, we're so glad you're here with us. If you're watching online, we're so glad you're joining us there from afar. Today we're continuing the series we've been doing the last two Sundays called More Than a Name. And I think this is such an important series for the times we're living in because, here's what I've been noticing. And I'm sure you have as well. I think for many of us and for those around us, the spiritual side of Christmas has kind of gotten lost or left behind. I mean, especially as I've become a full-time adult, right? And I think one of the main reasons for all of this is that we're just all so busy. We have so much going on, too much going on. I mean, outside of work and families and hobbies and a social life and whatever else, the holidays just tend to bring an extra level of busyness and stress with all the shopping and family parties and work parties and what other parties and gift buying and gift receiving and food buying and spending time with the people you want to and the people you maybe don't want to, and cooking and baking and hosting and you get it. With all that going on, it feels like often the spiritualness of Christmas gets lost. But I think there's another reason why Christmas seems to be losing its spiritualness. And you might be able to relate to this, and if you can't, then I know your neighbors most likely can. You see, for a lot of you, for a lot of people you know and love, your neighbors, your family, your friends, a lot of us grow up with this version of Christmas or of Christianity that never really translated into adult life, right? Maybe the version of God you thought you knew didn't really come through for you. Or the version of God you were sold didn't live up to what you were told. And so for many people, the spiritualness of Christianity and Christmas just gets left behind. And so in this series, our hope is to reopen that spiritual file and ask the question, what is that spiritual side of Christmas? And my claim is that the whole point of Christmas is so that God could show humanity, what he is really like, which is important for us to know. Because when we have a misconception, and that misconception turns out to not be true, we usually arrive at one of two conclusions. Well, I guess this whole God thing is a sham, or I guess God just doesn't exist. And I don't want that for you. I don't want that for your neighbors. I don't want that for your friends or family. So having an idea of who God is, one that is scriptural and accurate, is so important. So in this series, we're taking a look at that. We're looking at Isaiah chapter 9. We've been reading it the last 2 weeks. We're going to read it again, and we're going to read it on Christmas. So if you want to open your Bibles there, you'll find it open to the middle of your Bible. You'll be in Isaiah. If you accidentally get to the Psalms, keep flipping. We'll be at Isaiah chapter 9. Now, a quick reminder of what's going on during the time of Isaiah, during the time of our passage. There was a bunch of nations, right, surrounding one nation called Judah. And these nations were constantly at war with each other, trying to gain control of the region. It's this Game of Thrones-like situation. And while all of these smaller nations were at war, there's this large army, Assyria, large nation, large empire, Assyria, coming and sweeping them all up, conquering them, making them all a part of their empire. Now at this time there's a king named Ahaz. He's the king of Judah. And he hears that two neighboring nations, Israel and Damascus, are teaming up, planning on attacking Judah. So he calls, he has a brilliant idea that everyone says is a bad idea, because it was a bad idea. He calls up Assyria, the giant empire sweeping everyone up, and he says, hey, can you help us? And Assyria says, yes, we're happy to. And Assyria helped out, Judah was safe, and King Ahaz was relieved. But then Assyria comes knocking. Judah now owes them. In fact, Assyria now owns Judah. So now King Ahaz has to take all these trips bringing resources to Assyria. And if you've ever wondered, hey, I wonder if all of this stuff in the Bible, is that actually real? Did this stuff happen, or are they just stories? The answer is yes, they've happened. It's not just in the biblical record, but there have also been archaeological finds and inscriptions that talk about King Ahaz paying tribute to the kings of Assyria. But as he's in Assyria, as he's paying tribute, he's in Assyria, and he's looking all around him and falling in love with their way of life, especially with their gods and the way that they do religion. And so he'd take those ways and he'd bring them back to Judah and install them all around them. And eventually King Ahaz's leadership brought the nation to ruin. So God raised up this prophet named Isaiah. He has a book about him that we're about to read. Isaiah went to Ahaz and told him to stop doing what he's doing. That he's ruining the land. He's ruining his people. So turn back to the way that God intended him to rule. Follow God's way, not the Assyrian way. But then Isaiah takes a turn. It's like he steps into the future and he has this prediction. He looks around him and sees what it will look like one day. That a king is going to come and change everything. Which is what we're going to read now. But before we do that, let's pray. Oh God, may the words of my mouth, and the meditation of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight. O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer, and all God's people said. Isaiah 9, starting with verse 1. It writes, Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who were in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burns them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle, and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning. It will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born. To us a son is given. And the government, it will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. This is the word of the Lord. The coming king will be called Wonderful Counselor, a wise strategist with ways beyond our understanding. Coming king will be called Mighty God. a hero God that will take everything the enemy has to throw at him and yet emerge victorious. The coming king will be called Everlasting Father. And just like the last two phrases, the meaning here of Everlasting Father gets a little lost in translation. I were to guess, when you hear the word father, you probably think of your dad, which makes sense. And I would also guess that for some of you, that brings about wonderful feelings. For other of you, it brings about pretty terrible feelings, and others maybe just neutral. But when the original readers of Isaiah would have read this, they wouldn't be thinking about their dads. They'd be thinking about their leaders. Because that's what their leaders often saw themselves as the father. That's what they often had their people call them, father. I mean, even in America, we have a little bit of this, right? We have the founding fathers, the original leaders of our country. And so the king of Assyria was the father of Assyria, and then later the king of Persia and Babylon and Greece and eventually Rome. They were all the fathers of their empires, except for Rome. Eventually they went from father to God of their empire. That's how high they viewed themselves. The people in King Ahaz's time knew what it felt like to be under bad leadership, to have a father that didn't seem to care much about them. And to be honest, you probably know what that's like too. Not your dads, maybe your dads, but we see bad political leadership all around us, right? Politicians who care more about self-preservation than public good, who make decisions driven by polls and donors and re-election rather than truth or justice, who refuse responsibility and instead target opponents or vulnerable groups, who change positions for convenience rather than conviction, who treat authority as entitlement rather than stewardship. Both parties, by the way. If you're thinking of yours, if you're thinking of theirs, it's both. But maybe you also see it in your workplace. A manager who is constantly micromanaging, yet still somehow has a lack of clarity of what they want. Who hoards the credit, taking praise and deflecting blame down to you. Amber, stop nodding. Maybe you had a teacher who cared more about being liked than actually doing the job that they signed up for. Or a coach who cared more about winning despite whatever it costs to the kids, to you on the team. Maybe you've had bad parents who are inconsistent or unavailable or hypocritical. And before I shift the blame too much on everyone else, the church is quite famous for its failure in leadership. All you have to do is Google the words of pastor and scandal, and you will get hundreds or thousands of examples. We know what it's like to have bad leaders. And we know what it's like to long for good leaders. We're all looking for better leaders in our lives. There's a book called Leaders Eat Last. And in the book, the author describes leadership as being willing to sacrifice what belongs to you for the sake of your people. That's what a good leader looks like. They give up what belongs to them in order to benefit the people that they lead. And the image he uses in this book is from the Marines. It's this idea that Marines, when they line up for their dinner, for their food, those who have the highest ranking line up last. The point is to subtly communicate that leadership comes at a cost. You give up what benefits you for the benefit of those who you're leading. That's what good leaders do. Bad leaders do the exact opposite, right? Bad leaders give up what belongs to their people in order to benefit themselves. They sacrifice what they're supposed to lead who they're supposed to lead in order to benefit them. But I don't think I need to tell you that. You know that. You've had bad leaders. You've experienced bad leadership. And we all want a good leader to follow. The people in Ahaz's time also longed for that leader, that good father. Because they've had horrible ones over and over and over again. Remember how King Ahaz is falling in love with the Assyrian way of life? Well, one of the ways that was becoming a problem for his own people is he fell in love with the empire's way of practicing religion. He grew up in a religion where you would go to one place and sacrifice on one altar, but Ahaz thought, you know it's better than one altar? More altars. And so he decided that altars should be placed all over Judah. But the problem with more altars, it means more sacrifices. The problem with more sacrifices means more resources need to be sacrificed. And the problem with more resources being sacrificed is that it's less resources for the people who need them. Ahaz plunged his nation into poverty. He sacrificed the people's well-being so that he could look good to his Assyrian rulers. And so these words of Isaiah are words that his people clung to. Someday they would have a true ruler, a true father, the kind who is not going to sacrifice them for their own benefit, and one who would be everlasting. Because all of these empires, the Assyrian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, they all rose to power, but none lasted forever. So the hope lived on for people in Judah. The hope for a king that would rule like the everlasting father they needed. A leader who would sacrifice to provide and protect people, to give up himself for the sake of the many. And then around the first century, this man named Jesus came. And that's who his disciples believed him to be, the king Isaiah was talking about, the true everlasting Father. And the reason they believed this was because they walked and talked with him for 3.5 years. They saw what he did. They heard what he said. And there's this one time where two of his disciples, they went up to Jesus, James and John, they went up to Jesus and they said, hey, let us sit by your side when your kingdom comes. And you know what he said? He said, you know that the rulers of Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. In other words, they leverage their people for their own power. And Jesus goes on, not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great must become your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. In other words, I get that the current leadership structure is to sacrifice the people's needs for your own power, but that's not what it's going to be like in my kingdom. In my kingdom, the leaders are going to be the chief servants. Those who rule are going to be the first ones on their knees. Even I came to serve, not be served. Because that's what good leaders, that's what everlasting fathers do. Another time when Jesus was sitting with his disciples around a table, he noticed that there was no server there to wash their feet, which would have been customary at that time. So you know what he did? He took a towel, wrapped it around his waist, got on his hands and knees, and individually, one by one, washed the feet of his followers. It's supposed to be the other way around, right? I'm the leader. I should get the special privilege. No. Over and over again, Jesus modeled that kind of servant leadership where he sacrificed at a cost to himself for the sake of the people he was leading. And so the disciples began to believe that, hey, maybe this Jesus guy, maybe he's it. Maybe he's that everlasting Father. They became rather certain of it. At least until the world powers of that time did what world powers of all times do. Sacrifice someone for the sake of their own power. They crucified him. And when the disciples saw their hopeful king hanging on a cross, when they saw him breathe his last breath, that's when their hope died. Which is really important to remember, because I think sometimes people think that the disciples, they made all of this up. They made all of these stories up about Jesus in order to get other people to follow them and be like, hey, I knew the guy. You should follow me. But that just isn't the case. And the reason I know that isn't the case is because, you know what the disciples did as soon as they saw Jesus died? They either went and hid, or they went back to what they were doing before they met Jesus. Nobody believed in the kingdom after that. At least not until their friend Mary went and told them that she had seen Jesus raised from the dead. And well, actually, even then, they still didn't believe until he showed up. And then 500 other people saw Jesus risen from the dead. And the only reason that the disciples, the only reason that people believe that Jesus is the coming king is the picture that God, of what God is really like, the wonderful counselor, the mighty king, the everlasting Father. The only reason that anyone ever believed that Jesus was those things is because they saw him risen from the dead. And Isaiah said that someday a king would come that would be a leader that doesn't violently coerce people to give up their lives for them, but instead would give up his own life for his people. Jesus is that leader, which is why I think you all should follow him if you aren't already, because we're all looking for a leader to follow. I mean, aren't you repeatedly frustrated trying to follow terrible leaders that constantly let you down, all because they put their own selves, their own wants ahead of those that they're supposed to lead? And if we're honest, if you're honest with yourself, if I'm honest with myself, isn't it true of the heart? That at the heart of so many of your troubles is the fact that we constantly put our needs first, our wants first. See, if you're thinking of someone else right now, stop. I want you to bring it back to yourself. Isn't it true that the deepest place of some of your deepest struggles right now is because you're putting some of your own needs, your own desires and wants ahead of those you might be called to lead? The people in your life that you're called to serve. I mean, that's what sin is. It's something we all deal with. That selfishness that separates us from one another and ultimately separates us from God. But the good news of the gospel, the good news of Christmas, is that God doesn't just sit up in heaven casting lightning bolts at his people, punishing them for their sins. Instead, he sent his one and only Son to die in your place, in my place. That's the truth of Christmas. That God so loved the world that he was willing to put on flesh to dwell among us and be the leader, the everlasting Father that we all needed. The kind of leader that would tell us about the forgiveness of sins, the forgiveness of God, right up to the point where he would be killed for it. The kind of leader that would die so you could receive that forgiveness. And then would be resurrected so that you could be assured of it. You see, that's what God is like. The kind of king who gives his life for his people rather than demand his people give their lives for him. And here's the thing, if you're not sure about that yet, that's okay. Keep wrestling with it, keep coming back. But if you believe that, then you have to know what he's inviting you to do, which is to follow him in that way. He's inviting you to lead like him in whatever sphere you are called to lead in your life. I mean, could you imagine a world in which politicians gave up themselves for the sake of others? Where parents sacrificed themselves for the sake of their families? Where spouses sacrifice themselves for the sake of their husband, their wife? Coaches, pastors, managers, bosses, fill in the blank. How much different would our world be if we started leading like Jesus? If we were last in line, following and modeling his leadership. He's the everlasting Father that we're all looking for. And we're called to live in his example. At this table, we remember that unlike every other ruler, Jesus did not take from his people. He gave himself for them. His body was broken. His blood was poured out. Not because he lost control, but because this was his plan to save sinners like me, like you. And so as we come to this table today, we don't come because we are worthy. We don't come because we're all put together or we're faithful leaders ourselves. We come because we are hungry, because we need forgiveness, because we need grace, because we need to be reminded again and again and again that our hope does not rest in our leadership, but in his. So this table is for all who have put their trust in Jesus Christ alone for salvation, who are resting in his finished work and who desire to turn from sin and follow him. And if that describes you, you're welcome to come forward, not to earn grace, but receive it with thanksgiving.